Stuart Scott and welcome to the 5th virtual walking tour based on Bob Reed's Magical London, where we explore the history of magic in the streets of London. Today we'll be taking the Fair Game Walk. The tour takes us from the Barbican around the City of London. We'll hear about a famous producer of children's magic sets, we'll hear about magical postage stamps, we'll visit Bartholomew Fair, we'll meet fraudulent psychics and highwaymen and witness some peculiar and unusual events along the way. As ever, I'll be using photos, videos, maps and Google Street View to take you around following Bob's guidebook notes. Now the walk is based on Bob's original 2005 tour, but it does have a few embellishments from me. Now our walk starts here at the Barbican Centre, and as you can see, it's either a beautiful piece of brutalist architecture or some sort of cruel architect's joke. Let's look at a map of London. Now the walk we're going to do takes place in the city and we're going to zoom in here. Here we are on the map, right at the top. This area was the main fort of Roman London, built between 90 and 120 AD. You can still find various remains of Roman walls in this area. The word Barbican comes from the Low Latin word meaning a fortified fortress or gateway. The area was seriously damaged by bombing raids in the Second World War, and in 1952 it was decided to renovate it into new residential properties. It was designed for affluent city professionals and their families. The complex included housing, pedestrian high walks, London's largest conservatory, and the Barbican Centre. So it was here at the Barbican Centre in 1994 that I and my friend Andrew Burgess, another magician, attended an event. We brought with us various magic props and our unicycles, and while we were uninvited, we took it upon ourselves to perform outside the Barbican Centre. Shortly after our 20-minute street act finished, a representative from the event came marching out, and we were pretty certain that we'd be reprimanded for performing without an invite or a licence, and we were potentially distracting from the event that was going on inside. But thankfully, our fears were unfounded. The event was the 1994 Marvin's Magic Weekend. The representative was the Magic Circle president and father of Marvin himself, David Berglas. David told us that had he known we were coming, he would have put us in the stage show, and he went on to invite us to perform at the upcoming Amazing Great Children's Party in Battersea Park, and asked us to be part of the group photo which you can see here. You might be able to spot a few famous magical faces including David Berglas, Alan Shaxon, Marc, Ali Bongo, Michael Vincent, Bruce Smith, and of course Marvin Berglas himself. Marvin's Magic Weekend was a regular event run by the Marvin's Magic Company. The company itself was set up by Marvin Berglas. While David Berglas's legacy relates to his amazing stage, radio and TV performances around the world, Marvin Berglas's legacy is that as well as establishing the world's largest magic company, he may well have directly helped more young people to become magicians than anyone else in the history of magic. Marvin's Magic was founded by Marvin in 1987. It now runs magic departments in some of the most prestigious toy stores and toy departments in the world, including Hamleys and Harrods in London, FAO Schwartz in New York, and Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. As well as being a magician and entrepreneur, Marvin is a Gold Star member of the Inner Magic Circle and is the former vice president of the club. His work promoting magic sets to the public and subsequently setting literally millions of young people on the path to becoming magicians has been recognised by the magic community, the media and the toy sector. He's received awards from magic organisations for his contributions and from the toy industry for his innovations. We're now going to head south along Aldersgate Street to the Museum of London, so just down this way. And here we are at the museum. And here on the map you can see our route straight down the road from the Barbican Centre to the Museum of London. The Museum of London is the largest urban history collection in the world, with more than 6 million objects. The museum combined collections held by the City Corporation at the Guildhall Museum, founded in 1826, and the London Museum, founded in 1911. Naturally, the collection contains a few items of interest to the world of magic. The Museum of London is home to a painting called Popularity by Walter Lambert, who was also known by the name Lydia Dreams. Lambert was born in 1869 and was an accomplished painter. Lydia Dreams was his alter ego, a female impersonator ventriloquist who played a nurse using her vent dummy for a patient. He performed in music halls and on the US vaudeville circuit. In 1903, Lambert received a lot of publicity for his large painting popularity, which depicted himself and 225 other music hall artists. Lambert, as Lydia Dreams, is depicted on the far left, just behind the man with the sandwich board. She wears a gold hat with blue flower and blue dress. One of the other performers in the picture is G.W. Hunter. George Walter Hunter, born in 1850, was a British comedian and singer, also noted for his close-up magic and inventions. He's actually known as the father of the pocket trick, including the acrobatic matchbox and the red snapper. He's here in the top left corner of the painting wearing a black bowler hat, black bow tie and brown suit. The Museum of London also holds a collection of 24 gimmicked dice found in a pewter birdseed pot on the banks of the River Thames. These are from the late 15th century. They're made from bone, but according to X-ray, may have been loaded with drops of mercury so that their outcome is always known. 3 of the dice have numbers 1 to 3 repeated, and 3 others have the numbers 4 to 6 repeated. In the Middle Ages, these were known respectively as low and high dispatches. Rather than the magician, these dice are probably like to have been the property of a gambling cheat. One of the most curious incumbents of the museum is Psycho, an automata character built by the magician John Nevil Maskelyne with the assistance of John Algernon Clark. J.N. Maskelyne was born in 1839 and was a Victorian-era magician who spent much of his career working at the Egyptian Hall. He's also an inventor, creating amongst other things the penny-operated toilet door lock and, of course, Psycho. Built in 1875, Psycho was fashioned to look like a miniature Indian man sat cross-legged on a tiny wooden chest. The chest itself sits atop a clear glass cylinder, showing that there is no means for any mechanics or cables to transmit messages to the automata. Under Psycho's hand is a rack for 13 playing cards. Psycho would play a game of whist by picking cards and handing them to Maskelyne. Psycho's intelligent selection of cards was a mystery in the days before radio control and artificial intelligence. Staying with the Egyptian Hall, the museum is home to the 2 statues that were displayed outside the famous magic venue on Piccadilly. These are Isis and Osiris, Egyptian gods who adorn the exterior of the building from when it was first built in 1812. They remained a feature of the frontage when the building became a magic performance venue. These statues somehow found their way into the car park at the Museum of London. Another interesting connection is that these photos were taken by Mr. Martin Kaufman. Martin is a former trustee of the Museum of London, and he's a professional fundraiser who currently sits on the board of the Magic Circle Foundation, the charity that manages the Magic Circle's headquarters, the Centre for the Magic Arts. I would also note that the Museum of London is currently in the process of relocating to West Smithfields. From the Museum of London, we're now going to head south, and eventually we get to Postman's Park. Here we are. Now in 1887, the park was turned into a memorial for those who died saving others, and that included Sarah Smith, a pantomime player at the Prince's Theatre. Sarah Smith died from injuries received when, while wearing an inflammable dress, she attempted to extinguish flames which had enveloped her companion. Sarah Smith was the stage name of Sarah Gibson, who was born in 1845. It was actually on Friday the 23rd of January 1863, and not the 24th as reported on the plaque, that Sarah Smith had been performing at the Prince's Theatre on Oxford Street. In one scene, the dancers were to twirl across the stage, which was to be illuminated from above with special effects lighting created by a mixture of chemicals in 8 fire pans. Fellow performer Anne Hunt's dress had caught fire when a spark from one of the stage lights ignited the highly flammable material that her costume was made with. Sarah Smith immediately went to her aid, but her dress also caught fire. Hunt survived, but Smith did not. We travel through the park to King Edward Street, and over the road behind me there's a statue of Rowland Hill, who was the man responsible for the Penny Post magazine and the introduction of postage stamps. In 2005, the Magic Circle was honoured by the Post Office with the issuing of a series of stamps commemorating the Magic Society's centenary. 5 novelty stamps were produced for the occasion. The first class stamp, heads or tails, shows the design of a coin and a blank centre. The centre can be scratched away to reveal either heads or tails on the coin. Now this is quite a collector's piece, as collectors may wish to own 3 versions: the heads version, the tails version, and the mysterious unknown version. The second stamp is the 40p stamp, the rabbit and hat. This works as an optical illusion. The viewer needs to bring their nose close to the stamp to create the illusion that the rabbit is being pulled from the hat. The 47p stamp, knotted scarf trick, employs thermographic ink, so when the spotted scarf is warmed with the fingers, it will change colour. The 68p stamp is another optical illusion. After staring at the strange green heart, the viewer stares at a white background and the heart appears to be the normal red colour. And finally, there's the 3-cup trick. And once again, this uses thermographic ink. So by rubbing the fezzes, a pyramid reveals itself. A range of different postmarks were also used on the day of issue up to the 15th of March 2005. And these included the Magic Circle logo, a logo with a wizard, rabbits and hats, and the 3 shells. We now head north to Little Britain. Now, to many modern Britons, this street name will remind them of the famous BBC comedy show. The show starred David Walliams, a host of Britain's Got Talent, and Matt Lucas, a magic fan who appeared on Derren Brown's Trick of the Mind. The Little Britain TV show also featured a hypnotist character based very loosely on UK hypnotist Paul McKenna, with the rather amusing catchphrase, "Look into my eyes, not around my eyes, but into my eyes." And Little Britain the Street is also where many magic books were published. We now follow Little Britain northwest, all the way to West Smithfield. Now, immediately on our right is a small gate leading to St Bartholomew the Great. This is a little piece of Tudor England. Great St Bart is the oldest parish church in London, and it dates back to 1123. It was used as a location in the movie Shakespeare in Love, and it was founded by a juggler and a conjurer, Rahere. And on the map here you can see our route from the Museum of London to Postman's Park, the statue of Rowland Hill, and then along Little Britain to Southfield. The church came close to destruction on the 8th of September 1915 when Zeppelin L-13 dropped a large bomb on Bartholomew Close. The bomb created a crater 8 feet wide. The church was founded by Rahere in the early 12th century after he had a vision while on a pilgrimage to Rome. The vision was of St Bartholomew, who instructed him to build a religious hospital. The chosen site was on King's land, so Rahere had to win the favour of King Henry I. He managed to do this despite being discouraged by London's barons. Rahere was an Anglo-Norman priest and monk. Though details of his life have become confused, he's often portrayed as the king's jester or minstrel. He's listed as a canon of St Paul's Cathedral in an 1115 document. His effigy was installed in the church in the early 15th century. Rahere would become the subject of amateur magician Rudyard Kipling's poem, and he would be a major figure in Kipling's story, The Tree of Justice. Alongside the church is the narrow cloth fair and the Hand and Shears pub, which is the location where Lady Holland's mob gathered. It was at this tavern that the Lord Mayor of London would traditionally use cloth shears to cut a piece of cloth and to pronounce Bartholomew Fair open. Bartholomew Fair was one of London's preeminent charter fairs, and it ran from 1133 to 1855. It was also here at the Hand and Shears that Lady Holland's mob would assemble. This was the nickname given to a gang of ruffians who would initially barge through the streets, ringing bells and breaking lamps the night before the Lord Mayor's official opening. Later, the mob would turn to robbery, often surrounding respectable women and tearing their clothes from their backs. They would rob visitors to the fair, beat inoffensive passers-by, and would pelt locals who came to their windows, alarmed by the disturbance. Now, quite why the mob was named after a famous hostess of the period is somewhat unclear, but likely it was an ironic moniker. For context, the modern equivalent might be calling them something like Dame Judi Dench's Bandits, I don't know. But now, if we move on, we can see Smithfield, which used to be known as Smoothfield, which is where the name comes from. and this is a flat space that was the location of Bartholomew Fair. And here's our route from St Bart's Church to the Hand and Shears pub, and then back round onto Smithfield. Bartholomew Fair was originally a cloth fair that would run for 3 days. Its duration would vary over the years, running for a full 2 weeks for most of the 17th century, but eventually being shortened to just 4 days by 1691. While it started out as a fair for cloth, it grew into a pleasure fair and drew crowds from all classes of English society. The fair has become ingrained in British society through various plays and books. Ben Jonson, the English playwright born around 1572, named a play after the fair. And the diarist Samuel Pepys, born in 1633, wrote about seeing Ben Jonson's play at the fair in 1668. Pepys and his wife saw the play, which was performed with puppets. He enjoyed the wit of it, but was less amused by the abusing of Puritans. In Daniel Defoe's Moll Flanders, written in 1722, the heroine meets a well-dressed gentleman at the fair. Wordsworth mentions it in his 1805 work, The Prelude, where he refers to the din and the Indians and the dwarves at the fair. The fair grew to include 4 parishes, but it was eventually suppressed in 1855 by the city authorities for encouraging debauchery and public disorder. The Newgate calendar denounced the fair as a school of vice which has initiated more youths into the habits of villainy than the local Newgate prison. For literally hundreds of years, the fair featured unusual displays, including prize fighters, sideshows, musicians, acrobats, puppets, freaks, jugglers, waxworks, rope dancers, theatrical shows, and of course, magicians. And we're going to learn about a few of these unusual acts and spectacles, from strange beasts to unusual performers. In Jay's Journal of Anomalies, author Ricky Jay surmises that the Lycaean was likely displayed at Bartholomew Fair in the 1780s. The Lycaean was billed as a great monster of Africa. According to a playbill, one could view the beast as well as a young beaver from Canada that grunts like a pig. The fee was 1 shilling, less for tradesmen, servants and children. The extraordinary Lycaean was described as having the head of a wolf, the beard of a goat, the ears of a horse, the nails and fingers of a tiger, and a body like a man, and he dresses and walks upright like a man. The description has an uncanny resemblance to a werewolf. In The Prelude by William Wordsworth, he refers to various acts and displays at the fair, including the horse of knowledge and the learned pig. There were various trained animals that could apparently demonstrate amazing feats of intelligence, such as counting or answering questions by selecting specific cards with answers on. In the 1830s, the fair displayed a shaved bear, the great Siam elephant, and 2 of the smallest elephants seen in Europe. There was also a seal floundering in a large tub of water. In 1790, the famous unicorn ram was displayed at the fair, as was the famous ram with 6 legs. Now, records show that a huge number of showmen played Bartholomew Fair. The decollation of John the Baptist is one of the most important effects introduced in Reginald Scott's The Discovery of Witchcraft in 1584. It was performed by the magician Kingsfield at the fair in 1582. And in the illusion, the magician's assistant appears to be decapitated. You can actually see the images here of where the body is hidden underneath the bench. Flockton was an 18th century showman who performed here in 1777. He was known as the Prince of Puppets. He performed at Panton Street, where he presented a performing monkey, pole tossing by a 5-year-old child, and conjuring. The price of Flockton's fairground booths ranged from 3 pence to a shilling. He performed Italian fantoccini, a type of puppet show, and displayed dexterity of hand and put on short operas. He would end his act with a display of a musical clock. According to one visitor, Flockton's shows included a very clumsy juggler and a girl who performed an act with 4 swords, making figures with them, holding them above her head and thrusting them at her bosom. Flockton himself was said to perform conjuring tricks outside his show to attract an audience. But according to one unimpressed reporter, Flockton was a very poor conjurer. On the day after the fair, Flockton would hold a private night attended by highly respectable audiences of city marshals and aldermen. This would often be at the George Inn on West Smithfield. He clearly did good business, as he had an estate of £5,000 when he died in 1794. That's over £1 million in modern terms. He had no children, so this son was bequeathed to a widow called Flint and a performer called Daniel Gingle. Flint and Gingle continued Flockton's work until 1804. Gingle, a conjurer and circus performer, became sole proprietor after that. Gingle's booth was a theatrical one, where he put on a range of different performances. He dropped the puppets and the musical clock, and focused on performances that included magic, circus skills, and singing. He built a reputation as one of the greatest British showmen of the late 18th century. One performer, and perhaps a competitor to Flockton, was Jobson, another puppet showman. Jobson was prosecuted in 1797 with several other owners of similar shows for making his puppets speak. Apparently this was an infraction of the laws relating to theatrical licenses. Isaac Fawkes, born in 1690, was a famed conjurer known to have been a regular at the fair. He would give up to 6 shows a day. He became popular in the 1720s, and his booths attracted a lot of attention at the London fairs. One of his most famous effects was a variation of the egg bag. He was also said to have thrown a pack of cards into the air, where it transformed into birds. And he's been described as one of the old heroes of magic. There's a hoarding inside the covered market that shows a reproduction of a sexual fan, and in the centre you can make out Fawkes. Christopher Pinchbeck, born in 1670, was Fawkes' partner. He was a clockmaker and maker of automata, including moving pictures that were used in Fawkes' shows. Pinchbeck also built the apple tree illusion for Fawkes, which was a precursor to the famous orange tree illusion performed by Robert Houdin. In the 1780s there was a performer known as Mr. Lane, His Majesty's conjurer. His handbills included the poem, "It will make you to laugh, it will drive away gloom, to see how the egg it will dance around the room. And from another egg a bird there will fly, which makes the company all for to cry. O rare Lane, cockalorum for Lane, well done Lane, you are the man." His act ended with the 2 Miss Lanes surprising posturing and a hornpipe by Miss Anne Lane. The pupils of Mr. Lane were said to perform tricks with cards and balls and to tell fortunes. Knives were run through the hand without producing blood. Knives and forks were taken as pills. Flames and sparks from a forge were blown out of men's mouths. All sounds very dangerous. Rahere was a magician in the late 1700s who performed facial contortions. He presented astonishing, wonderful, surprising and unparalleled deceptions and recreations. He could fry a pancake in any gentleman's hat over a candle, as well as perform effects with cards and lemons. The act included what might be thought of as gurning, with the performer hiding his nose in his mouth, holding a shilling between his nose and his chin, and picking up a full wine glass between his chin and his nose. One of the better paid performers at the fair in 1828 was a pig-faced lady who was supposedly able to gross £150, which works out to be £16,000 in today's money, which was in excess of magicians, jugglers and fire eaters at the time. Another unusual act to display was the celebrated Miss Sarah Biffin, who in the 1820s painted miniature images despite having no hands or arms. She was born without arms or legs and learned to paint by holding a paintbrush in her mouth. Her clients included Kings George III and IV and William IV. We're now going to move to the north wall of St Bartholomew's Hospital. The hospital is commonly known as St Barts, and it's one of London's teaching hospitals. It was founded in 1123 by Rahere following his vision, and here on the wall next to the hospital we find a memorial to William Wallace. William Wallace was a Scottish knight and one of the main leaders during the Wars of Scottish Independence. He was famously portrayed by Mel Gibson in the movie Braveheart. Wallace was charged with treason and was sentenced to death in 1305. And it was here at Smithfield that he was hanged, drawn and quartered. Now, Braveheart himself was very religious and unlikely to have had much of an interest in performance magic, but another William Wallace, this one born in 1929, has a very important place in British magic history. William Oliver Wallace would be better known both on stage and off stage by his stage name, Ali Bongo. Ali was a British comedy magician and the president of the Magic Circle. He was born in India and spent his younger years growing up there while his father was stationed there with the army. The family would later move to Kent, where Ali went to school. His interest in magic grew and he would work for Harry Stanley's unique magic studio and become the manager of the magic department at Hamley's toy shop in Regent Street. Ali borrowed from Eastern imagery and traditions to create a stage persona. the Shriek of Araby. He wore robes, golden curl-toed slippers and headgear that incorporated both a fez and a turban. This was combined with a long drooping moustache and horn-rimmed glasses. Ali would go on to appear on TV shows in the 60s, 70s and 80s, performing his colourful and energetic routines. He was also host of the Ali Bongo's Cartoon Carnival, which aired for 9 episodes. Ali was also a prolific illustrator and writer of magic books. But within the magic community, Ali is perhaps best known for his work as a world-class magic consultant. He consulted for plays, operas, ballets and a raft of TV shows including Doctor Who, as well as classic magic TV shows such as David Nixon's Magic Box, The David Nixon Magic Show and The Paul Daniels Magic Show. Ali Bongo was also David Renwick's inspiration for the character of Jonathan Creek, and Bongo himself would advise on that show as well. Now, before the Victorian market was built, a fairground stood here, with stalls extending halfway along St John Street. Bob instructs us to take a last look back at St Bart's Hospital because it was here where Henry Lemoyne died in 1812. Henry Lemoyne was born in 1756. He was a scholar versed in Hebrew and Latin and became a book dealer and publisher who found some success in publishing collections and anthologies. In 1791, Ebenezer Sibley, author of various occult subjects, successfully defeated the Crown government's efforts to suppress his occult publications. With the newfound freedom of the printing press, the Conjurer's magazine was launched by his publisher, Henry Lemoyne. The magazine covered a range of paranormal and fringe science issues. It would be rebranded as the Astrologer's magazine in 1793. We're now walking around Smithfield and we find Hosier Lane. Now it was here that Thomas Adie's A Candle in the Dark was published in 1605. Thomas Adie was a 17th century English physician and humanist who authored 2 skeptical books on witchcraft and witch hunting. His first and best known work, A Candle in the Dark, or a treatise concerning the nature of witches and witchcraft, was written in 1655 and was used unsuccessfully by a defendant in the Salem witch trials. The book also contained one of the earliest references to the words hocus pocus. Adie's second book, A Perfect Discovery of Witches, perhaps named in honour of Reginald Scott's discovery of witchcraft, stressed that witches, despite the accusations, were innocent. It was also here in Hosier Lane in 1710 that the new mathematical fountain was exhibited, and it sounded pretty amazing to be quite honest. The fountain was operated by a Charles Butcher, and it was described as a waterwork 12 feet long and 9 feet high, made in white glass. Somehow it was able to contain a tavern, a coffee shop and a brandy shop. With 2 taps, one for hot and one for cold, the fountain could be ordered to produce drinks on command. Tea, cold liquor, white wine, claret, coffee, cherry and raspberry brandy, even punch. It was advertised as, "For satisfaction your own eyes believe, art cannot blind you nor your taste deceive. Come and welcome my friends and taste her pass. 'Tis but 6 pence to see it, and 2 pence each glass." We're now going to head on to Giltspur Street, down this way. Yep. Okay. And this was once the site of many printers. And on the corner with Cock Lane, we find the 17th century statue of the Golden Boy of Pye Corner. So if you look at the map, you can now see our route around Smithfield to Cock Lane. The statue marks the spot where the 1666 Great Fire of London was stopped. The Fat Boy signifies the gluttony that was attached to the tavern that was once on this site. We're currently at the top of Cock Lane, and this was the location of the famous Cock Lane ghost hoax. In 1762, Richard Parsons of Cock Lane reported hearing strange knocking sounds and said that his daughter was able to commune with the spirit of the deceased Fanny Lynes. The spirit apparently claimed that her previous partner, one William Kent, Parsons' former tenant, was responsible for her death. Kent was understandably eager to clear his name, but the regular visitations attracted widespread public interest. Members of the public would visit the house in Cock Lane to witness the spirit rapping. Visitors included the Duke of York, the younger brother of King George III. Eventually, a committee was set up to investigate the supposed ghost. One famous committee member was Samuel Johnson, author of the Dictionary of the English Language. Finally, Parsons and his daughter were caught in the act of faking the ghostly knocking. A trial was held on the 10th of July 1762. Richard Parsons was pilloried and sentenced to 2 years in prison, and Mr. William Kent avoided murder charges based on the testimony of a ghost. Now, at the bottom of Cock Lane, which we're heading down now, we join Snow Hill, and it was here on the left that you can see a plaque commemorating the Saracen's Head. The Saracen's Head was an inn that dated from the Middle Ages. It became a popular stop for mail coaches approaching the City of London. Samuel Pepys and Jonathan Swift were reportedly patrons of the inn, and it was mentioned in Charles Dickens' Nicholas Nickleby. It was also here that copies of Hocus Pocus Jr. were sold. This was a 52-page anonymously authored book published in 1634. It's thought to be the first illustrated book in the English language devoted to the subject of magic. It included work on the cups and balls and the first version of the stack of pence trick. At the 27th Collectors' Day, held at the Magic Circle headquarters in 2002, Dr. Philip Butterworth, a reader in medieval literature at the University of Leeds, presented research that a William Vincent was a possible author. Now, as we will hear, this is certainly not the only magic book with a mystery around its author. Now, we're going to head left and then hang a right onto the Old Bailey. And if we look up, you can make out the famous statue of Justice on top of the building with a blindfold and scales. Now, back to the map, you can see our journey down Cock Lane to Snow Hill and then along to Old Bailey. At the corner is the Central Criminal Court, and this is the site of the notorious Newgate prison. It was here that the infamous robber and conman Jonathan Wild was incarcerated before his execution. Jonathan Wild, born in 1682, was a figure in the London underworld. He's notable because he operated on both sides of the law, posing as a public-spirited crime fighter, the thief-taker general, while simultaneously running a criminal empire, using his crime fighting to remove rivals and launder money. He was also something of a con man, often collecting rewards for valuables that he himself had stolen. He was even consulted on crime by the government due to his apparently remarkable prowess in locating stolen items that presumably he himself had stolen. Another famous occupant of the prison, executed here in 1789, was Thomas Denton. He started out making kettles but developed a taste for literature. He moved from Yorkshire to London, where he witnessed a fascinating work of automata. Given his manufacturing ability, Denton was convinced that he could replicate the automata. He built his own speaking figure and toured the countryside, collecting vast sums exhibiting the contraption. He went on to build a writing automaton before setting himself up in the art of plating coach harnesses. This industrious work would lead to him trying his hand at counterfeiting coins. He would be convicted of counterfeiting, but his work was so good that the court deliberated for 7 hours as to the veracity of the coins that he reportedly made. He would not be convicted for the offence of coining, but he would instead be found guilty of having the implements for coining in his possession, and that alone proved fatal. It was also here at the Old Bailey that Helen Duncan was put on trial. Victoria Helen Macree Duncan, born in 1879, was a fraudulent medium and the last person to be convicted under the 1735 Witchcraft Act. In 1926, she set herself up as a clairvoyant medium, offering seances in which she claimed to be able to permit the spirits of recently deceased persons to materialise by emitting ectoplasm from her mouth. In 1928, a photographer attended one of these seances and took various flash photographs of Duncan mid-materialisation. The photos clearly showed dolls and painted papier-mâché masks draped over sheets. Her ectoplasm was examined by the London Spiritualist Alliance and was determined to be nothing more than cheesecloth, paper, egg white and toilet paper. The great psychical researcher Harry Price was able to duplicate her feats. He even paid Helen Duncan to conduct a séance for him. As well as regurgitation of cheesecloth, Price would also conclude that bits of rubber gloves and even cut-out heads from magazine covers were used in the act. Duncan reacted violently at requests to x-ray her. She also refused to be filmed with an infrared camera during a séance. One of her former maids confessed in detail to having aided Duncan in her medium tricks, and her husband admitted that she used regurgitation. Perhaps one of the most disturbing stories of Helen Duncan was from the Second World War. In 1941, Duncan held a séance in Portsmouth where she claimed to commune with a sailor from the sunken HMS Barham. In December 1941, the sinking of HMS Barham was still a confidential matter, and it would not be officially reported to the public until January the following year. Due to this breach in confidentiality, the Royal Navy began to take interest in Helen Duncan's supposed psychic abilities. How did she really know the secret of HMS Barham? In January 1942, 2 Navy lieutenants were among the audience of Duncan's séance. Lieutenant Worth was unimpressed when a white cloth figure appeared, claiming to be his aunt. This was largely because he had no deceased aunt. Another figure claimed to be his sister, who was actually alive and well. It was Worth who reported Duncan to the police. At a later séance, undercover policemen arrested Duncan when a white-shrouded manifestation appeared, and it turned out to be Duncan herself. After HMS Barham was torpedoed and sank in November 1941, the Royal Mail sent letters of condolence to the families of all 861 members aboard. The families had been asked to keep the secret until the sinking of the ship was officially announced. It's estimated that around 9,000 people would have known about the sinking. If each told just one other person, then almost 20,000 people would have known. Far from being a closely guarded secret, Helen Duncan most likely picked up on the gossip. Helen Duncan was found to be in possession of a mock-up HMS Barham hat band, clearly unaware that by this time Navy hat bands only had HMS and no ship name written on them. It wasn't the Barham leak that got her busted. Her arrest did not take place until 3 years later. While initially being arrested under the Vagrancy Act of 1824, it was determined that she should be prosecuted under Section 4 of the Witchcraft Act of 1735, which covered fraudulent spiritual activity. Such an offence was trialable by jury. Not everyone was pleased. Prime Minister Winston Churchill thought the case was a waste of resources at a crucial point during the war. Helen Duncan was charged along with 2 representatives from the Psychic Centre in Portsmouth and her agent who set up séances. In total there were 7 offences, 2 counts of conspiracy to contravene the Witchcraft Act, 2 counts of obtaining money by false pretence, and 3 counts of the common law offence of public mischief. Her trial for fraudulent witchcraft made her a minor celebrity in wartime London. The raid on her séance had yielded no hard evidence, and the case was therefore based on witness testimony. Unhelpfully for the authorities, the majority of witnesses denied any wrongdoing had happened, and bizarrely, and with no sense of irony, the court barred Helen Duncan from using her supposed psychic powers as part of her defence against being fraudulent. She was found guilty on only 1 count and was imprisoned for 9 months. She would be arrested once again in 1956 and would die shortly after. While she is normally cited as an example of a clearly fraudulent medium, she retained supporters among the spiritualist movement. Her trial almost certainly contributed to the repeal of the Witchcraft Act, which was contained in the Fraudulent Mediums Act of 1951. The Fraudulent Medium Act was itself repealed by Schedule 4 of the Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading Regulations of 2007 that were published in 2008. We now walk down Old Bailey and then turn left into Ludgate Hill. And you can see where we are just moving down Old Bailey and arriving at Ludgate. This is the parish of St Martin's, identified in 1584 by Reginald Scott as the hangout of a French card mechanic known as Jean Cotore. Reginald Scott realised that being able to demonstrate some sleight of hand feats might serve to strengthen his case against the notion of witchcraft. When he set out to write his book, he knew nothing of the art, so he took lessons with Cotore, allowing Scott to dedicate a section of his famous book to the art of legerdemain. Far from simply exposing the tricks of the conjurer, Scott actually expressed his sorrow at having to expose such secrets in the cause of unmasking witchcraft as trickery rather than dark arts. We're now going to head up Ludgate Hill, and on the left you can see Stationers' Hall. and it was here that the Copyright Office stood from 1842 to 1924, and all publications were registered here. And the pioneer of printing and the father of Fleet Street, Wynkyn de Worde, set up his first press near here in Shoe Lane. Also, the classic magician's manual, Expert at the Card Table by Erdnase, was registered here. Expert at the Card Table is a handbook on card sharping, first published in 1902, and it's likely to be found in the library of every card magician. In the magic community, the book's referred to as Expert, EACT, or occasionally the Bible, or just Erdnase. While the book contains some amazing sleight of hand and ways to cheat at gambling, one of the biggest mysteries seems to be around the identity of its author, a certain SW Erdnase. The author was most likely an American who wanted to conceal his identity for fear of being arrested for the publication and distribution of obscene material, as at the time books on gambling methods were deemed obscene. Magician and author Martin Gardner looked into the matter and suggested that one James J. Andrews was the likely author. Andrews was also known to be a fakir who performed a clairvoyant act in New York and published an article in Harper's Magazine in 1909 called The Confessions of a Fakir. And crucially, his name, when you drop the first three letters, James Andrews, was Erdnase, spelt backwards. However, Gardner changed his opinion on James J. Andrews and went on to propose that small-time conman Milton Franklin Andrews may well have been the author. Author and deception theorist Barton Whaley went so far as to write The Man Who Was Erdnase, which contained interviews from the 1940s. Andrews died during a murder-suicide in 1905 in San Francisco, just as the police were closing in to question him about a killing in Colorado. The writing style suggested a well-educated man who would be publicly known, but would need an alias to protect his public standing. David Alexander, a magician and private detective, proposed that the mining engineer and author Wilbur Egerton Sanders was the man. In fact, SW Erdnase is an anagram of W.E. Sanders. Chris Vasuber wrote a book identifying one Edward Galloway, a printer and circus performer, as the mysterious author. Galloway worked at the time at the printer where the book was printed. He would later publish other remarkably similar books. A forensic linguist was hired and confirmed that the writing style of Galloway and Erdnase was a good match. Galloway was also known to own a first edition of the book and seemed to match the physical description given by the book's illustrator. The description stated the author was a small man, aged around 44 on February the 28th, 1902. Professor Richard Wiseman apparently suggested that Herbert Lee Andrews, whose wife's name was Emma Shaw Andrews, E.S. Andrews, S.W. Erdnase in reverse, might be the author. Herbert Lee Andrews lived a few blocks away from the US printer in the book. Jerry Sadowitz noted that a text written by one Robert Frederick Foster in 1897 has a very similar style to Erdnase. Foster was a member of the Society of American Magicians. The great Spanish card magician and theorist Juan Tamaritz put forward a theory that the book was written by a Peruvian magician called L'Homme Masque, the Masked Man. Born Jose Antonio de Diego y Zavala in 1851, he performed mostly in France, always wearing a mask. Some of his sleight of hand techniques were published, and he was thought to have taught the famous magician T. Nelson Downs. In later life, he's thought to have bought a wine farm in Bordeaux. A Midwestern con artist known as E.S. Andrews was known to be active around the time, and his movements fit with those of Erdnase. And Erdnase, spelled backwards, as we know, is E.S. Andrews. But there are other names that have been put forward too. For example, August Rotterberg, a German-born magic dealer living in the US who published books on card tricks the same year as Erdnase. There was Harry Stuart Thompson, a publisher, expert in sleight of hand, and a friend of Houdini's. We have James M. Andrews, a casino owner and expert card dealer, and we have James DeWitt Andrews, a Chicago lawyer and writer. There was also Edwin Summer Andrews, a travelling agent for a railroad company, and William Symes Andrews, an electrical engineer who wrote about magic squares. In the book Artifice, Ruse and Erdnase, Hurt McDermott proposed that one E.S. Burns was a possible candidate as the author of The Expert at the Card Table. Hurt summarised this, though, with the wonderful line, "The only problem is there's no evidence," which pretty much brings us back to where we were at the beginning. But recent groundbreaking and extensive research from Professor Richard Evans, who presented at the Magic Circle's 2023 History Day, seems to provide the most compelling argument yet for Erdnase's identity. Evans suggests that an office clerk by the name of Emery Cobb Andrews was SW Erdnase. Evans' analysis is fascinating. It's set out in Volume 9, Issue 3 of the Oldie Magic magazine. We're now going to continue our journey, and just a short distance along here, we arrive at St Paul's Cathedral. On the map, you can see the short journey right here to St Paul's. Around St Paul's were grouped publishers and booksellers, including William Brome in St Paul's Churchyard. It was Brome who published Reginald Scott's Discovery of Witchcraft in 1584. Now, clearly this isn't the same cathedral that Reginald Scott would have known. The current design is a mere 320 years old, being built between 1666 and 1700 after it burnt down in the Great Fire of London. But it was here, at the earlier version of St Paul's in 1601, that Morocco and William Banks performed an incredible stunt. Morocco and William Banks lived in this area in the late 16th century and early 17th century. Morocco was a performing horse and William Banks was his trainer. Morocco was known variously as Banks's horse, the dancing horse, the thinking horse, and the political horse. It's thought that Banks worked in the stables of the Earl of Essex. Morocco was born around 1586 and is recorded as being bay or white. He was a small muscular horse with remarkable litheness and agility. He was named after the Morocco leather from which saddles were made and was often addressed as Signor. He was also particularly intelligent and easy to train. Morocco would walk on 2 legs and 3 legs and play dead. He could pull out particular audience members such as those wearing spectacles. He could distinguish between colours. He could count coins and indicate to whom they belonged. He could even drink a bucket of water and then urinate at Banks's command. Delightful. He was trained to bow to Queen Elizabeth I, but when asked to bow for King Philip II of Spain, he would bare his teeth, whinny and chase Banks off stage. By the mid-1590s, Banks's horse was one of the most popular entertainers in London. Banks accumulated an impressive fortune. In 1601, perhaps to fight off competition of other animal trainers of the period, Banks in Morocco ascended over 1,000 steps to the rooftop of the then flat St Paul's Cathedral and performed an act at the top. The act toured to Scotland and then to mainland Europe, but Banks would be arrested in Paris and charged with sorcery, forcing him to reveal that many of the tricks were accomplished through subtle hand gestures. He was arrested again in Orleans and even sentenced to be burnt at the stake. Banks was able to redeem himself, and during the performance, Morocco knelt down before a cross held by a priest, thus proving he was not the devil. Morocco most likely died around 1606, and William Banks went on to be hired to work in King James I's stables and would later train horses for the Duke of Buckingham. From St Paul's, we're now going to head along this road, past St Paul's Cathedral. We turn left onto New Change. We keep going along here, and then we're going to turn right onto Cheapside. We keep along here for a little way. Bob instructs us to take a left onto this street, which is King Street, and then we keep going and we cross over Gresham Street, and finally we make it to Guildhall Square, which is home of the Guildhall. And you can see on the map the route we've taken from St Paul's onto New Change, onto Cheapside, and then onto King Street and arriving at the Guildhall. The Guildhall is a civic building which has been used as a town hall for several hundred years and is still the ceremonial and administrative centre of the City of London. In Roman times it was the site of an amphitheatre, but the current building began construction in 1411. In the left near side corner is Guildhall Library, which holds a superb collection of playbills and handbills, including those of magicians. The library is also home to a collection of playing cards and the Clockmakers Museum. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the end of Bob Reed's 5th walking tour of magical London, Fair Game Walk. Let's take a quick look at where we've been. So on our journey we started at the Barbican and we heard about Marvin's magic. Then we went south to the Museum of London to see loaded dice and meet Maskelyne's Psycho. We went through Postman's Park, we learnt about the Magic Circle stamp collection, we went past Little Britain, we went on to St Barts where we met Rahere, we went to the pub, the Hand and Shears, and then we arrived at Bartholomew Fair. There we met strange creatures and even stranger performers. We met 2 William Wallaces. Then we headed on. We went to the Saracen's Head, and then to the Old Bailey, where we heard tales of highwaymen and Britain's last witch. Then it was on to Stationers' Hall and the mystery of Erdnase. Then to St Paul's Cathedral, where we met Banks's horse. And finally, here to the Guildhall. Well, it's been quite a journey. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it hasn't been too long. And I hope you can also come back and join me for Bob's 6th and final walking tour. In the meantime, stay safe and don't get spirited away.